Hi, third graders. Mrs. Moore here. Today, I get to teach you lesson 2 for our picture graph lessons. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to create a scaled picture graph to represent a data set. You will also be able to determine an appropriate key based on the information in a data set. Let's get started. Before we learn this wonderful new information, I want to start by reviewing what you already know from yesterday's lesson. So you know that the purpose of a picture graph is to compare data easily using pictures or symbols. I would like for you to pause the video and remember, where do our eyes always go first when looking at a new picture graph? And what are the components of a picture graph? Wonderful, boys and girls. I hope you were able to remember that your eyes always go straight to that key. Your key unlocks the picture graph because it tells the value of each symbol. After the key, where do you look next? That's right, at the title. The title is kind of like the main idea. It tells what the entire graph is about. After the title, you look at the specific categories. The categories tell you the specific types of data that we're looking at. So for this one, the specific types of data are the grades and the number of students in book club in each grade. And then, of course, the symbol is very important because it represents a specific amount of data. And you always determine what the symbol is worth by looking at the key. It tells you the value of each symbol. Wonderful review. Let's start with some new learning. So before we get started, would you please make sure you either have your picture graph resource pulled up on your screen or printed and next to you? It's going to really help with our new learning today, boys and girls. So today we're going to take information from a data set and we're going to use it to complete picture graphs. So let's start by just looking closely at our data sets. Well, I know this data set represents cookies baked at a cookie baking competition. That's my title. And my categories are different people and the number of batches of cookies they made for this competition. So I see that Lila made 5 batches of cookies. Durante made 20 batches of cookies. Mikale made 15 batches of cookies. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to use this data to make a picture graph. But I notice the most important part of the graph is missing. There is no key that tells me how much each circle is worth. So it's going to be our job to determine the key. When selecting your key and what each symbol should be worth, it's very important to study your data set. Okay, so Lila made 5, Durante made 20 batches, Mikale made 15. Okay, it's important because you need to determine and select a factor that is able to represent the data in each category. So I always start by determining, is there a factor that goes into each of these multiples perfectly? Is there a factor that goes into 5, 20, and 15 perfectly? Is there a number you can think of that goes into all of these multiples? Pause the video and see what you can come up with. Oh my goodness, mathematicians, were you able to determine that 5 is a factor that goes into each of these totals perfectly? Well, we got very lucky because 5 goes into every single one of these totals. And so if I make each circle worth 5 batches of cookies, I will be able to represent each data set perfectly. Let's get started. So if Lila made 5 batches of cookies and each of these circles is worth 5, I know for Miss Lila, I would only have to give her 1 circle. The reason why is because 1 circle isn't worth 1. It's worth 5 because that's what we decided our key was worth. So if each circle is worth 5, then this represents 5 batches of cookies that Lila made. Perfect. So 5, which is perfect because she made 5 batches of cookies. Now, Durante. Durante made 20 batches of cookies. I would not need to add 20 circles because each circle is worth 5. So I'm going to keep adding a circle worth 5 batches of cookies until I reach 20. So 1, which represents 5 batches of cookies. 2, well, let's see, it represents 5 10 batches of cookies. 3, which doesn't represent 3 batches, it represents 5, 10, 15 batches of cookies. One more, which would represent 20 batches of cookies. 5, 10, 15, 20. Perfect. Okay, now Mikale. I'd like to give you guys a challenge. Would you pause the video and determine how many circles will we need to add to represent Mikale's 15 batches of cookies? Third graders, were you able to determine that we would need to add 3 circles to show that Mikale made 15 batches of cookies because each cookie or each circle is worth 5 batches? Perfect. I'm going to check 5, 10, 15. Yes, he made 15 batches. So for this particular picture graph, 5 was a perfect key or scale because 5 went into each data set perfectly, and we didn't even have to split it in half. Boys and girls, but that's not always the case. Let's look at this data set, because for this data set, we will have to come up with a factor that can be split in half to accurately represent each of the numbers in the data set. So I know that this is about the class ice cream preference. And so we had students vote to show their favorite ice cream flavor. 6 kids voted for chocolate, 12 for vanilla, 2 for strawberry, 1 for Rocky Road, 7 for chocolate and vanilla, and 2 for cookie dough. Take a second and see, is there a factor that goes into every single one of these totals perfectly? Or is there a factor that goes into 6, 12, 2, 1, 7, and 2 perfectly? I hope you were able to determine that the only factor that goes into all of these perfectly is 1. 1 is not usually a very good scale because I would have to add 12 ice cream cones for vanilla. I'd rather come up with a more efficient factor. So let's see. So there is not a factor that goes into every category in the data set, but there is a factor that could go into each category if it was also able to be split in half. So I know 2 goes into 6, 12, 2, and 2 perfectly. But it could also represent Rocky Road and chocolate and vanilla, because if I split the ice cream cone in half, it would be worth half the value, so it would be worth 1. So if I made each ice cream cone worth 2 students and a half of an ice cream cone worth 1 student, I know right away that all of the data in my data set could be represented. Wonderful. So let's get started. So I know each full ice cream cone is worth 2, and each half ice cream cone is worth 1. So if 6 students favored chocolate, I would only have to add 3 cones. The reason I only have to add 3 cones is because each cone is worth 2. So I know it would be 2 for 6 students who voted for chocolate. How many cones would I have to add to represent the 12 students who voted for vanilla? Pause the video and tell me, how many cones would I need to add? You are exactly right. We would need to add 6 cones because each cone is worth 2 and 12 students voted for vanilla. So let's check our work by counting by 2s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so each cone is worth 2. Let's count them all to make sure that that represents 12 votes. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Wonderful. Well, if 2 students voted for strawberry, if 2 students voted for strawberry, I know I would only need to add 1 ice cream cone. Oh my goodness. 1 student voted for Rocky Road. So I could not add a full ice cream cone because that's greater than 1. It represents 2 students. But there's a perfect solution. Since a whole ice cream cone is worth 2, a half of an ice cream cone is just worth 1. So if I add a half of an ice cream cone, I know right away that's half the value of 2. So it represents 1 student. What would I do? Pause the video. How many whole cones and how many half cones would I have to add to show 7? Perfect job. I would add 3 whole cones to represent 6, and then 1 half cone to show 7. Wonderful. Okay, third graders. Well, if 2 students enjoyed cookie dough the most, how many cones would I have to add? You are exactly right. I would just add 1 full cone. Boys and girls, thank you so much for watching this lesson and for looking at data sets with me to determine appropriate keys. Please watch this lesson as many times as you need to feel very comfortable determining an appropriate key. Then, please complete your assignment today on Google Classroom and turn it into your teacher when you're all done. Please make sure you're referencing your picture graph resource and this video to make sure that you get every single answer correct. I cannot wait to look at your assignments, and I want to thank you all for your hard work. Bye, boys and girls.